that I have is, I would like to see this board take a look at whether or not we need to continue on with the assessing department. I think that we should expand and go talk to the Macomb County assessor and get some feedback from them on taking over the job. This will be a prime time to do that without having to impact our current assessor, or she's retiring. That's a big bonus. But I think you're missing an opportunity. I really have a problem with this board, who I believe will not be here, a majority of you will not be here in November, assigning anybody to the assessor's job. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. For whatever it's worth, I believe one resident that spoke had appeared before the board 2 weeks ago to bring forward a complaint about the assessing department. For whatever it's worth, I was notified by Ms. Ryan prior to that, but not in sufficient time to have it on our last agenda item. So I know that prior to the time that I was aware of the residents concerned, Ms. Ryan had indicated to me that she was looking to retire. Certainly, residents have several options available to them, and complaining to the state or reaching out to the folks that oversee assessing is an option. I know that other residents have done that. I know at least of one instance where they filed a complaint, and Ms. Ryan was found to be in compliance. And I know another resident began the process and dropped it. So during my approximately 5.5 years as supervisor, I know of 1.5 complaints, if you will, and neither of them were found to have any substance, but certainly there's a process, and residents welcome to do that. Another question was, would this posting include internal candidates? So the process that we have per the contract is initially within a bargaining unit, and there are 2 bargaining units that we're dealing with here, excluding the firefighters. The supervisory union, if there were someone in that department that had the qualifications as assessor, and again, as we said, these are classes and testing that's required in order to be the assessor. In our case, I think we were asking for, I think you have to have a level 3. I couldn't remember if it was 2 or 3. And that's a fairly lengthy process, and education, ongoing courses, and so forth. The likelihood of that as an internal candidate within that bargaining unit that would have the right to apply, a given right within the contract, is probably not likely. Once that's the case, then the next question would be, well, is there anyone employed by the township that could apply? And the reality is, yeah, we are not in a position where we can say, well, you can only do this job and you can't apply for another job. It happens to be that we have 2 property appraisers, and both of them asked a similar question to me. Fact is, one of the current property appraisers has the appropriate licensing, one does not. That wouldn't necessarily give that person preference or a lack of preference, but it gives them the opportunity to apply, and I think we as employers would be foolish if we did anything other than accept their application and interview them for the position.
Well, I think our practice has been their applications reviewed at the same time as we review the entire outside pool of applicants.
Correct.
We've always, like, and even like building officials, like any of the current people that are qualified, they just get in the pool and we throw them on the interview list.
Correct. So the short answer to the question is are there internal candidates? Well, to my knowledge, there's one, but it's in a different bargaining unit, so they have no inherent rights other than the opportunity to apply and be interviewed for the job, and I think it would be foolish not to do that. But certainly, at this point, I think it's also smart for us to go outside and see what's available. And then there was also a question about outsourcing the assessing to the county. I can't disagree that it would be wise for us to take a look at all of our options at this time, and that's one of them that I will do. But I don't want to I don't want this issue to fall by the wayside in pursuit of another option, because this process of advertising, interviewing, background investigation, whatever you want to call it, calling on references, that can take multiple times. By the time we bring it to the board, then the board acts, 2 weeks go by, they give a notice to their employer, July can come up pretty quick through that process. So I'd like to begin this process, but I can assure the board that I will conduct a parallel process of doing just what the resident had mentioned, so.
We are way ahead of the curve here, so we can, geez, we got 60 days. I mean, nice thing about assessing is assessing's assessing, right? It doesn't really change.
Yeah, this is,
Through the community, like the BSNA and everything.
yep,
Sort of the same process wherever you're at.
yeah, we've talked in the past that promoting internally, say, for example, in our water and sewer department, comes with certain advantages, because we have an entire infrastructure throughout the township. And over a period of time of working on an infrastructure, you tend to understand it. You tend to know little ins and outs. Much the same way that if you were a firefighter in the township for 10 years, 15 years, you know where certain roads are, and you become aware of it. Assessing might not necessarily be one of those things. We also talked about the building official. The codes and the rules for assessing, for building ordinances, those are pretty common from community to community, so those aren't necessarily as critical to promote from within. So, but again, really the intention here is to just look to see what is the candidate pool like, both inside and outside, go through that interview process, and then point B, if that was the decision, bring it back. It's ultimately up to the board. All right, any other discussion? Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello, with support by Mr. Batanti, to post advertise an interview for the position of assessor with a recommendation to be brought back to the Board of Trustees at a later date. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
I would like to make, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Motion carries. Go ahead.
I don't know if the board knows this, but, Oakland County, they do all of the assessing for Oakland County. There is no community in Oakland County that has their, own assessors. They handle it all for everybody.
Okay. And of course, that's not the case in Macomb County, right?
Correct, yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
I'm just
Okay.
pointing it out.
All right, next on the agenda is item D3. Board members, SEMCOG, along with assistance and participation from several municipalities across multiple counties, and along with the Stewardship Network, has been successful in securing a Michigan Invasive Species Grant from the DNR and DEQ. The purpose of the grant is to establish a Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, or CISMA, and then fund the eradication of Phragmites, as well as educate the public about their impact and how to treat them. The total grant from DNR and DEQ is $254,526. The allotted amount for treatment in Harrison Township from that was $18,480, which of course would require a match of $18,480. This would allow for the treatment of up to approximately 120 acres of Phragmites. Included in the grant is the employment of an individual to coordinate identification and treatment of the Phragmites, as well as program management, so no additional costs are expected. So this is basically, I guess, maybe a summary. Individually, with the exception of probably Clay Township, which has been on the forefront of management of Phragmites, if you think of Harson's Island, and the impact that that's had on vast areas of wetlands. Most communities have areas of concern with Phragmites. Some communities have no concern or very limited concern, and maybe it's only an issue for the Department of Roads. Within Macomb County, Harrison Township, Chesterfield Township, and Washington Township, the area that encompasses Stony Creek, those are the three counties that have three areas in the county that have the largest issue with Phragmites. Phragmites is a broad term. There is Phragmites australis is the invasive species. There is a native Phragmite that has been in this area, and they do return upon eradication of Phragmites australis. We tend to lump them all together, so I suppose there's a good Phragmite and a bad Phragmite. But for the purposes of this, we're talking about the invasive species. Phragmites form what's called a monoculture. The rhizomes, or basically the roots underground, as they spread, they actually excrete an acid out the tips of the rhizomes as they spread, and they kill other species and just dominate an entire area. So when you think of the North Marsh at Lake St. Clair Metro Park, that had been entirely overrun by Phragmites australis. So sometimes people say, well, I still see Phragmites there. True, but they're a native species. The seed bed was able to return once they were eliminated. There's a specific process for treating Phragmites. There's a timeline of when you treat, when you remove the biomass, when you do spot treatments afterward. And there's also, I guess you could say, a right way and a wrong way to do it. There are both public lands as well as privately held lands where Phragmites are a problem. This grant really is twofold. One is by forming a SISMA, or this management area, we're able to pool resources across multiple counties, number one. Number two, we're able to take some monies from that grant to employ someone to coordinate the entire effort, so that we're not in the process of providing educational opportunities to business owners and property owners in the township to explain how they might treat on their property. This individual does that. Identifying particular areas and tracking this, reporting back to the state the number of acres that are treated. Again, that would be a function of the SISMA. We've done a windshield survey with SUMCOG personnel, and there are students that are involved, there are universities that are involved that are, making available, students to assist with the identification. But ultimately, when all is said and done, they estimate a cost of about $300 per acre to treat, both between the chemical application and the, labor to do the work to treat Phragmites. We have a pretty substantial area through the 155 acres. It's caused some of the concerns with getting the water from the Beechwood pump station out to the creek that runs out by the boat livery at Jefferson. So there are some substantial areas of infestation. Wherever these invasive Phragmites take hold, they displace not only native species, but the wildlife that exists and basically lives in that area. Wildlife will return, but this is an ongoing process. And I know when you were deputy supervisor, there was some Phragmite treatment done back then. You probably have better knowledge of it, I just remember it.
And we did some treatment, but you need an ongoing program of treatment to have an effectual response, because if you leave one little rhizome in 5 years, it'll be back worse than it was before.
Right.
So that's part of the process. And as you said, education is an important part, because you see people who will plant the Phragmites in their ditch because they look nice, or they'll put them, in their garden, and all of a sudden they're going through their lawn. So that's another important part of this.
And it is a part of the maintenance. I mean, I can certainly point to particular county drains in the township that have Phragmites infestation, and that biomass, that process that they go through, as they break down and regrow each year, it contributes to a loss of flow within the drains. So
The other nice thing with creating a SISMA is it usually allows for private citizens to have easier access through the permitting process to get the chemicals for treatment on their property. I know we have some marinas that have issues with getting permits, finding somebody to do the work. This helps make that process easier, so they can maintain their property.
I'll make a motion to accept our portion of the Michigan Invasive Species Grant for $18,480 and allocate up to $18,480 in matching funds for the eradication of Phragmites.
all right.
Support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. York with support by Mr. Tavanello. Discussion? Hearing none, we'll open up the floor for public comment.
I'm Joy Forrest, Ashby Preserve, Foxwood Court. I'm just really, really thrilled to hear about this. We've been fighting Phragmites in our wetlands at Ashby, and I'm neurotic. I'm out there all the time cutting and poisoning and everything, and I refuse to let it take over. And some of our wetlands, there's a section that has been taken over completely, and there's a section that I just have been fighting. I will not let it take over, and I'm thrilled to hear about this, and really, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
William Bardell, 19-year resident, new kid on the block, permission to speak. I think it's a great idea. What I want to know is, so I talked to a lot of people, and what I heard was when they spray, they don't let the residents know. And I know one gentleman uses his garage as a man cave, gentleman's area, and he said he was sick for a month and his eyes were burning. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I believe this is a good idea, but what is the protocol when spraying, and will you indeed be following the protocol so people aren't sick for a month and they can know not to go in their garage, when it's time? And do you post it on the website or the Cablevision or somehow? What is the protocol when indeed you do spray? Because I've got a lot of complaints that it's not being done. So, again, thank you for letting me speak. Thank you.
Jim Sensak, 31698 CN1. I'm fully supportive of this. I believe I talked to a couple months, 2 or 3 months ago, about the same thing, indicating that we had some areas outside of our subdivision, Venice Shore subdivision, that are located as they're a area that the Planning Commission has set aside as part of a PUD at the McCray Harbor thing, and we're concerned that these Phragmites will grow into our canals, and we currently are fighting them and so on. The big reason I got up here is I see that you've got about $18,000, and you think it could conceivably cover 120 acres. My concern is that we not get involved in doing any Phragmites control in either Selfridge or Metro Beach. Those people have, Metro Beach, in fact, got their own grant, and I think what we should do is focus along the ditches, the county ditches, these little isolated areas that are going wild, and the ladies' area over there. And I guess the question I have is, who do we talk to on this SISMA? Who do we talk to? Do I come in and talk to you, Ken? That might be fun. Or do I talk to a planning commissioner? Do I talk to who do I talk to? And I need to know that. It doesn't really say that in here, who the actual contact people are going to be for determining where these actions are going to be taking place in Harrison Township over the next, I believe it's a year. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Paul Disjardin, the end of Riviera Street. My question is similar. We have the Murdoch Ballard drain that runs on the south side of Riviera Street that at Jefferson there is just totally inundated with the Phragmites. And my question would also be, who do we talk to and how do we know what areas will be addressed? So, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment. Now, try to answer some of these questions. So if someone said, hey, this is a good idea. The key to this is that because it is difficult to fight on your own, but also if on one property we went really aggressively about the business of treating Phragmites, but just across the street we left a stand of them, it doesn't do us much good because they're just going to spread. And you know, like invasive species in general, we're not, you know, this isn't polio. We're not going to eliminate it, but we're gonna try to, bust it back, They'll be there forever. I mean, they're gonna be around. So what is the protocol? That's a great question. That's part of why the grant application and actually the grant program was centered around establishing a SISMA. Because the reality is, we don't have staff members who are educated or come with that prior experience necessarily. I mean, it isn't to say that there isn't someone somewhere in the township that has some knowledge of this, but generally speaking, we don't have environmentalists or staff members that have these qualifications. And the reality is, most of our neighboring municipalities don't have them either. Larger municipalities tend to be urbanized. The more rural municipalities tend to be smaller, more limited forms of government, but unfortunately, that's where Phragmites is most likely to occur. So the concept behind a SISMA is to have a coordinator that can do several things. One is work with contractors to make sure that the work is done properly, so that literally the grant will pay for a professional who comes with the qualifications. There's a job description for the coordinator to know the protocol. And second of all, to educate residents and to make available materials to residents, as Mr. Witt pointed out, so that you don't have to go through a whole permitting process, an educational process yourself. They'll conduct classes to educate private property owners on the process of treating it. Will we follow it? There's complaints that protocol hasn't been followed. The township, with the exception of, I think, some backpack spraying in some rural areas, hasn't done a comprehensive treatment. Huron-Clinton Metropolitan Authority did some comprehensive treatment, but that was done, again, not by the township. So the answer to your question, what is the protocol? I don't know, but that's the good part about it, participating in a SISMA. We'll have a professional to advise us and the residents how to address it, and ultimately work with contractors to make sure that that they are complying. Question about what properties might we treat? It's important to note that within the board packet, the Huron-Clinton Metropolitan Authority is an applicant, so they have applied for funds to do their own properties. None of these funds would be used on Selfridge or HCMA property. So good question, but was something that we'd already discussed. And who do I talk to? Well, up till now, I didn't even know. I've attended meetings, I've participated in the grant application. I believe at a prior board meeting, I'd updated the board saying that we were participating in this process. A decision to, if we win the grant, a decision to fund a share is being made today, but I've been in the process, of attending meetings and helping to, get the grant. And at this point, there isn't even, they're hiring this person. So, certainly, you talk about $254,000 in grant money and then all the matching grant money. We're not gonna spend $500,000 plus or minus across multiple counties without, that education and bringing it forward. The goal is to get rid of Phragmites. So the person that might get this position to be the coordinator, part of that job description is to have outreach in the community so that people can come to meetings. We may or may not be fortunate enough to have a meeting here, but maybe they'll do a regional meeting in Chesterfield Township. That remains to be seen. But this person will be, a couple different communities offered up space within their municipality to say, hey, they can have their office in Harrison Township or Chesterfield Township. I'd love to have the person stationed here. I think we'd get the most bang for our buck, but whether or not that's geographically smart remains to be seen. But who do I talk to? I can't tell you now, but once this grant begins to move forward, we'll identify and ultimately employ for a period of time a coordinator that'll take care of that. So I think I got them all, but I don't know if there's any other discussion or questions. Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. York with support by Mr. Tominello to accept our portion of the Michigan Invasive Species Grant for $18,480 and allocate up to $18,480 in matching funds for the eradication of Phragmites. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. I guess I I omitted the fact that there's actually, I think there are five identified species. The majority, certainly the vast majority of the issue is Phragmites, but there is an effort to identify, I think, frogbit, and, you know, I'm not gonna remember the names, something warp.
Rush.
Yeah, flowering rush, I think, is one of them. There's like 4 ground-type species. And there's actually, believe it or not, there's an app for your phone. You take a course, take a class, and I think it's MISIN, MISIN, is the acronym, but it's the Michigan Invasive Species Identification Network, something like that. You take a course if you have it, because smartphones have GPS. You can take a photograph of what you see, punch in, basically, you know, identify I'm standing in the area, measure, you know, it's 200 square feet, 3 acres, that sort of a thing, and to help basically through grassroots build a database of invasive species. And so there are 4 others included in that, but in our case, by and large, certainly Phragmites are our issue, so. Anyways, we'll open up the floor for public comment. We ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes in length, and they can be about any subject you choose.
Richard Rapp. Last meeting I came forth and described a problem I had with my board review with the employee. In short, that employee interjected that I could not appeal a taxable value on my property. And more importantly, when I objected to that after my presentation, she said, quote, "It's the law." I've been sent an audio file on this. I gave Ken Rule 263 last meeting from the tax tribunal, which states, "A property tax appeal petition contesting a property's state equalized or taxable value may be heard in the small claims division of any of the one following properties is exclusively involved, and the first one is residential." So I can stop there. Second of all, Public Act of 236 of 1961, which is the unauthorized practice of law. A person shall not practice law or engage in a law business. I'm going to stop there. I've gone back and forth with Mr. Vekest on this issue. In the end, this was what I got. I can tell you that we did discuss the matter with Ms., I'm not going to go for, and provided advice on how a similar situation should be handled in the future. Unacceptable. I have filed a complaint with the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs and the Michigan Bar. That one's a little bit of a stretch, but I consider telling the Board of Review it's illegal when it is clearly legal. And the ironic part was Carol discussed with me, you can do this to appeal your taxable. That's what I did. No surprise, once again, a denial from the Board of Review. I want to know if somebody's going to do something about this. I've gone back and forth, and now we have Carol retiring. I don't know what to do here. Everybody just sits there and stares at you, but what this employee did, I can't imagine anywhere else that you would be working for your employer if you engaged in that conduct. And she's not a second grader that engaged in bad language on the playground and is in timeout. I mean, she shouldn't be here. And you better not put her as the assessor. So I have 3 options, the Department of Licensing, the Michigan Bar, and I'm here to say that I will support Mr. Senstock's bid for supervisor because I've had my differences with Jim in the past. I don't agree with everything that he says. Yeah, Darren is sitting there dumbfounded. I'm telling you, nobody treats me like that. And to be told, we're not going to do anything about it, in short, that's all there is to it. Jim will not put up with this kind of behavior. And, tax increase after tax increase. If some of you guys had the amount of skin in the game that I do, maybe you would stop and think, how much can we put on the people here? But I can't take it anymore, and I'm not going to take it anymore. And so, I will be here every chance I get reminding the taxpayers, if you have a problem with your assessing department, if you have a problem with your board of review, statutorily it stops at the supervisor. And this is my action, and this is what I'm going to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen Heithaler from Ashby Preserves, 35814 Foxwood Court. I just want to thank Mr. Bill Batanti for coming to our residences last week. right after the meeting 2 weeks ago. I spoke with him here, and he immediately called me the next day, and I appreciated that someone from the board did take the time to come and see what we're dealing with. He came up with some different solutions, different ideas for solutions, and I did forward those on to our board and our management company. If anyone else on the board would like to talk to any of us after the meeting, there are 2 board members here as well as a number of our residents. We'd be more than happy, thrilled to take you around our facility and see so you can see what we're dealing with and why we are talking and coming to the meetings. Thank you again. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
William Bardell, 19-year resident, new kid on the block, permission to speak. As I was saying about this Watertown, I think I have a right to talk about the dumping in our lake. And I think it does have something to do with you guys on the board, because you guys never made a resolution for Save Lake St. Clair. You say you're for Lake St. Clair? Well, put some skin in the game and put a resolution. A lot of talk, no action. I have a right to speak about the dumping of turds in our lake. And I cannot change you guys. All I can ask for is an epiphany. I cannot read your brains. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. All I ask for is an epiphany. Think about it. I will be calling Mr. H. Erb the president. Now, they're very sweet people, as I stated, but I would like them to know that they're dumping turds in our lake. And you can't put lipstick on a pig. Like, again, I said they're sweet people, and you got to have a little bit of, you got to have the flowers and the drainage, yes, but you can't dump poop in the lake. And it does have something to do with you guys. You didn't make a resolution a year ago when Mike Gutlow came here. Ken, you said, I don't know him from Adam. You got a picture taken. Rah, 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 we're all about Lake St. Clair. Well, it does have something to do with you guys. So make a resolution to save our lake. I can speak. I'm a resident. I pay taxes. I pay for you guys. I pay taxes. The Martin Retention Basin dumped 16 million gallons on 3/31/16, and they dumped from 9:10 p.m. to 5 a.m. in our lake. Again, there's no live real-time validation that it's getting treated. I went boots on the ground and I talked to Brent Avery at 9 Mile and Jefferson. Boots on the ground, I talked to the guy. They do it by hand. They do it by hand in 2016 with computers and technology. They do it by hand. There's no proof. They disassembled Doug Martz and the Water Board. I'm not going to tell you that Mark Hackle disassembled the Water Board. Mark Hackle disassembled the Water Board, and it would have cost us a penny a month. What does the Water Quality Board do? The Water Quality Board is checks and balances. What the Department of Environmental Quality puts out and what the Water Board does, they check for a penny a month. Who disassembled it? Do you want me to say it again? I don't think I need to. I think you guys know who disassembled it. They disassembled the Clean Water Board. Okay, so now we got Candace Miller coming. She's going to run. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. I called Candace Miller. Candace Miller wanted to talk about the border and defunding Obamacare. I couldn't get a word in edgewise. So now she's running for Morocco's job? I don't know. Maybe she'll do good. I don't know. But when I tried to talk to her about it, all I heard was about immigrants jumping the fence in Mexican border. They don't come here to go to the disco, they come here to work. They come here to do hot tile roofing, they don't come here to go to the disco. They come here to pick tomatoes. All I hear about is the border or defunding Obamacare for pre-existing conditions. I hope Mrs. Miller does something. And I hope they stop dumping, and I hope you guys let people speak from now on.
Thank you.
Jim Senstock, 31698 San Juan. I'd like to thank Mr. Rapp for his indication of support for, and I'm sure everybody on the board knows I am running for supervisor against Mr. Verkest. That will be a battle, but that will be out in the November general election. What I'm urging is that everybody pays particularly close attention to how some of the trustees that are sitting up here right now have voted on issues over the past 3 or 4 years. You may be surprised at just how many times they voted to support Ken. In fact, I think I've referred to them as bobbleheads in the past. But the fact of the matter is, these people have voted against your interest as residents consistently at Ken's direction. And I hope that everybody will pay attention in the Republican primary and the Democratic primary for the trustee races, because that's where it's going to be decided how we change this board up here and get some more responsive people for the residents of Harrison Township. So once again, thank you. I look forward to a nice, clean race with you, Ken, but I guarantee you it's going to be a hard one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joy Voris, 35822 Foxwood Court, Ashby Preserve. I would also like to thank Mr. Butani.
Good enough.
Appreciate, close?
Close.
It's nice to know that we're getting some support, and I'm curious to know what other conversations or discussions, or if that's allowed, regarding our situation, and if there's any other thoughts you've had regarding it. We still have filthy streets. Nothing has really changed, and I'm mainly up here to find out if there are any other thoughts on the subject. And I'm also curious to know who is up for reelection. I should probably know that, but I don't. And everybody? Okay, thank you.
I do have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Did you hear from our building department at all since the last meeting?
I haven't.
Hey, man.
No, I'm asking.
no, it's public comment.
I mean, I'm asking. I mean, that's a fair question. They were here.
Yep.
The ladies here, so you didn't hear
I
from the
can't
building
answer for
department
our
or-
advisor, for
Or
our,
from Mr. Axtell or Mr. Brent Condon, you haven't heard from any of them guys in 2 weeks?
not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I'll see you tomorrow.
Cool, excellent.
Mr. Rice was out there, correct? Mr. Mike Rice was out there?
You know, this is
Because
public
he
comment right
mentioned,
now.
he mentioned to park cars
Mr.
in the
York.
street, so the trucks can't get through?
Don't know.
Alright. Oh, the people are asking for help. I think it's a fair question.
You can campaign later.
Yep, and we've got a forum for that, but let's just try to stick to that forum where we open the floor for public comment, and then we get unlimited time for board comment.
That's all comment on.
Good evening, my name's Joanne Garrissey. I'm also inside of Ashby Preserve. I spoke at the last board meeting, and I'm coming again to this meeting. I've been to our own management company. I've been to our own board of directors. I am uniquely the only property that shares a boundary line with the new builder, successor developer that's in. I'm also the only property who now has water damage in their basement with leakage through the walls, not through the sump well, not through the floor drains, through the corner of the walls that the property touches the successor builder's property where the open PVC drain pipes are.
I found it interesting when the people of Ashby Preserve was asked if the ordinance officer had been out within the last 2 weeks. Because I watched that meeting, and I really felt for them. And you were right, Mr. York, about the ordinance about the water. Whatever the government says on the building, how high you have to be, what is it, the feet above sea level, whatever it is, FEMA, they still have to contain their own water. And this is a problem I've been having. And I've been trying to contact the ordinance officer since early January, and then February, and then I really concentrated in March when we had the rains. Because I am having a very, very bad drainage problem coming from the person behind me. And I was into your office to talk to you twice, Mr. Verkes, but you weren't there. And your deputy wasn't there one day, so I went over to the building department, and I asked Pete if Mr. Conant was there, and he said no. And I said, okay. Gave him his card. I said, well, I have his number. He said, well, take his card. I said, okay. Called him the next morning, or that day, and I left a message asking if he would call me back so I could make an appointment with him even. Explained a short verbiage of my situation. No call back. I made 4 or 5 phone calls to him. I was into Mr. Verkes's office 1 or 2 days after the last meeting, and I showed, is it Andrew? Very nice young man. Showed him the pictures I had taken and everything, and he says, well, I'll send him an email, because I told him I'm not getting any callbacks. He says, well, that's strange, and I went, I'm not. And he says, well, I had told him to call you before, and I says, well, I didn't get it. So he sent him an email. Another week went by, nothing. So then I went there at, what was it, 8:45, 9 o'clock in the morning, and he was there. I caught him before he ran out the door. And I showed him the pictures, and he's saying, well, you're lower. And I went, yes. He says, well, you're getting water. And I said, yes. I says, but don't you know we have an ordinance? It seemed like he didn't. I can't say for sure whether he did or didn't, but he brought up the GSI or whatever. GIS. And he had trouble finding out how to operate that. And he had to ask somebody how to get to where you find the
Elevation.
that's it. Thank you. And he says, well, you're 2 feet lower and you're that corner. I says, I know. A lot of the dirt's washed away underneath. I says, I'm bringing dirt in. And he says, who are you having do it? I mean, very, like, and I went, somebody. He said, who? And I went, a licensed builder. And he shut right up. But he had no right to question me, because the problem was coming from the person behind me that has an engineered field that sits quite much up. And we all know. And I found out, I only bought this home last summer. And I didn't find out until the snow started melting and I started getting all the water from talking to the neighbors. This has been going on for quite a long time, and they're older. And I asked them, I said, why didn't you call the township? They didn't know we had an ordinance. They've been living with that. 3 houses on my street, and then 1 or 2 maybe on either side of this person. So I don't know what your ordinance officer does, but it's been almost 2 weeks, and I have not even gotten a call back to say, we're looking into it, you're next on the list, I've got this to do, that to do. So far, he's not impressing me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. So I'll do my best to respond where I can and answer some questions. The first individual who spoke had indicated that he'd had a concern or a problem with the Board of Review, and he quoted an individual rule. I did investigate the matter, and I did report back to him. The the only way that a Board of Review can review an issue of taxable value is if, for no external reason, if taxable value grows greater than the rate of inflation, and I'd explained that and replied that. Specific to what the employee said, we did have a conversation with the employee. The question was asked, is someone going to do something? Based on what we determined, we do not believe that what the employee did rises to the same level that the resident does. So I did address that matter. I did investigate it. I talked to the assessor and made sure that we addressed it in the way that we thought was appropriate. Certainly, as the resident indicated, there are other options or matters of recourse that he has, and that matter's not up to me. I made a comment that statutorily assessing stops with the supervisor. Actually, once we have an assessor, the responsibility for assessing is really ultimately, in other words, the supervisor is the assessor in the absence of having an assessor. So there are definitely limitations that I have based on the fact that we employ someone who is licensed by the state of Michigan. But certainly I do handle HR issues, and I did investigate that matter, and unfortunately the resident and I disagree on what the appropriate course of action is. Let's see, there was a question asked, when are we up for re-election? All townships, the elections run concurrent with the presidential election. So every 4 years in the state of Michigan, the entire board of trustees is up for re-election. And that's not true just for Harrison Township, that's across the state. I did drive through Ashby Preserve. I did investigate it, but I know that there was a question asked whether or not the building department had contacted anybody, and I think we talked about this at the last meeting. If we have permits for construction, we have the authority to regulate construction. That's the authority that we have. If there's permits for soil erosion, then the appropriate body that issues those permits has the ability to enforce those. And I know we discussed 2 weeks ago that the county was out and took measures to make sure that contractor took the appropriate action. I believe that when we met 2 weeks ago, I guess just my recollection, that this was likely possibly a civil matter or a legal matter between the builder and the property owners. And so we'd asked Mr. Huth, and I know throughout the week I'd talked to Mr. Huth to say that he'd been in conversation with some folks, and I don't know if Mr. Huth can give us that update, but as we left it 2 weeks ago, I wasn't under the impression that our building inspector was going to take action because his ability to regulate things is limited to whether or not people are following the building codes. So, you know, but
Mr. Verkes,
Yes, Ken?
just want to interject a comment. At the end of the meeting, I had asked that we have a plan of action. That plan of action was that there was going to be conversation between Mr. Huth and a representative from Ashby Preserve regarding sort of a list of issues, what might be under our control, what might be a civil matter.
Correct.
And it was my understanding that that was going to occur, and it was not necessarily that Mr. Condon or somebody from the building department was going to go up, because not that it's not an appropriate action, but it was my understanding what we're trying to get to is a concrete list of what the issues were.
Right.
And that's kind of where we left it. That was my specific understanding
Right.
at the end of that meeting.
Yes, at last meeting, I met with some of the residents here from Ashby Preserve. We decided along the lines of what you're discussing at the board here, that I should be in touch with whoever their liaison is for these problems. Everyone decided that was the management company. I left my card, I asked them to send me information on who the contact was for the management company. They may have done that, I never saw it, I looked for it, I didn't see it. So I did touch base with Mr. Verkest, he gave me the information. I did call the lady in charge of the management company. We talked just about some of the things I'd seen over the years with these types of issues. She did the same. She said that the homeowners association was gonna retain private counsel. She asked me to hold on, that person would call me. I said I worked with a number of these guys over the years, with, wearing the township hat. They wear the hat for the homeowners association. Be glad to do that. And she said I'd hear from them. So, I have not yet, but I stand ready to do something else if asked to do so.
Well, I would say if there's, and I know VJ, I can tell you at least 2 instances in the township where there was a builder building a house, and during the construction, he was flooding another house. And VJ went out there and shut down the flooding and told them, you can't do that. I know that we can do from our building department, because I know VJ did it. He went and told the builder, you can't be flooding this guy's backyard, which the builder was doing, saying, if he has a pipe going into this lady's condo and flooding, you can't do that. We can shut that down here. You gotta keep that stuff on your own property. If guy's building a house, behind me, you can't run your pipe all the way to my house and flood my yard. We know that, period.
I would agree with that also.
So I think that particular issue, I think we need to have somebody, if we could, at least take a look at that.
Sure.
If we could.
And on an ongoing basis, throughout the construction process, there are points at which you call for an inspection, and those inspections occur. When a problem is identified or cited, we take the appropriate action.
I mean, I could
But-
tell you, if I was that lady and
Mr.
I looked
Yard?
out and there was a pipe, like flooding my basement, I'll tell you where that pipe would be. I'd go out there at the saw, and the pipe would be gone.
Sure, absolutely. Yep, and I absolutely have no problem in talking to the building department about that issue and make sure that they're mindful of that. But again, as we left it 2 weeks ago, it was my understanding that this was probably likely more of a legal matter and not a function of enforcement, that the township has the authority. But I will make certain that if there are violations of any kind, that the building inspectors and building department is fully aware of the concerns of the residents. But when we had this conversation 2 weeks ago, Mr. Huth had shared I think that he'd gone through something similar in his very own neighborhood, and so I consider him to be kind of the point guy on this. I empathize with the residents and the problems that they have. I just believe that there's a thought process among some of the people here tonight that somehow we as a board of trustees or the township possesses some authority that I don't believe that we have, or there may be a misperception on how much authority we have on this matter. And it isn't unique to this development. When you have a development that goes for a period of time, stops in construction, and someone else comes in and takes over, and there is that change, there are gonna be some of these problems. I'm not, I'm not aware of every issue, and again, it was kind of what we talked about, identify those things, if there are issues we can address, I'm certainly not gonna sit here and tell you I don't want our employees or personnel to address them. When I visited the site, I didn't identify, those issues that, at least from my own experience, rose to that level. And I know that when there are inspections, if there's an open hole inspection, a foundation, or a rough inspection, our inspectors are going out there for various trades. But I'll make sure we'll have that conversation to keep an extra eye for, violations relative to drainage.
Mr. Supervisor, before you continue, can you make sure that yourself or the building inspector copies the board through email on their findings and any action taken?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Then there was a couple of comments regarding water quality and the fact that you know, we're not addressing the problem. There are different styles of addressing this issue. We're fortunate to have, as a resident of Harrison Township, Mr. Doug Martz. He's been a pretty strong advocate for water quality. And I know, I tell the story, I'm sure, to Mr. Martz with a matter of pride, how he, at one point, I think he mounted a toilet to the top of his car and drove it around to try to raise awareness, and I appreciate that. That's his style. We did have Mike Gutto in. He asked us if we could take a picture holding up a banner, and we did do that. But what I'd said to him was that if he wants to bring that cause forward, there's a way to approach that, and it isn't just to show up at a meeting and say, I demand that you guys take a picture. What I'd suggested to Mike, because he was going around to other communities trying to get support for SaveLakeSt. Clair.org, that oftentimes having a conversation prior to a board meeting gives the board members the opportunity to do the research. I'd indicated to him that I was aware and I had liked the page and I appreciate his effort, but that I can't speak for all 7 of us in saying that we're aware of what his cause is, and just showing up into a meeting and say, I want you to take a picture with me, may not necessarily be the right thing to do. Sometimes you like to say, if this is a worthwhile cause, you know, why not send us some information prior to a meeting? Why not ask to be on the agenda? Why not approach it from a different angle? So I certainly, maybe my quote was, I don't know you from Adam. I don't recall saying that, but what I'd suggested to him was that if you want to champion a cause, there's probably other ways that he might find more success in visiting other municipalities. But I did say to the Board of Trustees at the time that I thought it was a worthwhile cause, and we did take the photograph per his request, not per ours. I apologize if any resident believes that we're trying to prevent anyone from speaking. We have a timer and a suggested time limit. I'm sure I could count on one hand the number of times we've asked someone to wrap it up in the 5.5 years that I've been supervisor. But specific to wastewater and the issues that are related to that, there's different ways to advocate. I believe that the solution to this problem is at the state level, and I've concentrated my efforts primarily at that level. I also believe through SEMCOG, it's a good way to advocate for these issues. I have participated in the Clinton River PAC, the Public Advisory Committee, Clinton River Watershed. I participate in all their events. I appreciate all the different ways that we might address water quality, but I think it just happens to be that perhaps our styles are different. I know there was some questions brought up regarding the building department and concerns with drainage and flooding. I will talk to Mr. Condon about the residents' concerns. Unfortunately, the reality is, I think whether it happens to be folks that are sitting here in this audience or folks who might be at home or throughout all of Harrison Township, I've lived here my whole life for as long as I can remember. Springtime in a lot of neighborhoods is going to bring a certain amount of puddling and water accumulation. And in all of those cases, again, we're not necessarily an enforcement body. There are certainly circumstances where we can be, but the reality is when FEMA comes in and declares that we have to say that all new construction has to be a certain level, and properties on either side or front or back are at a different level, the reality is you're going to get some of these issues. That isn't to say that we won't ask Mr. Condon to take a look or the department to take a look, but unfortunately, this isn't the first complaint like this we've had. And again, the reality is some of these in mixed neighborhoods aren't always necessarily a function of ordinance enforcement.
Then why do we have the ordinance?
I don't know if there's any other board comment.
I do have one.
I have a comment. I consider Mike Gutto a friend, and he and I communicate pretty frequently. He helps me with some issues. He's been working together with me on some things, and I've been helping him. I've been quoted frequently on his LakeStClair.org page. He knows that he has my full support. And one of the reasons he came that night with the banner was by my suggestion. I didn't know he was gonna be here that night, but, that was my suggestion. But to stand at that podium and to mislead voters into thinking that any one of us has anything to do with preventing dumping in our lake is it's very unfair to the voters. We can't do anything about it. That's something that's done at a different level from ours. I mean, it's county level, it's state level, just like you said. I don't think that we should stick our head in the sand and ignore the problem. I think and you can look on my Facebook page and see how often I share things consistently about what's going on in the lake. But I don't think that that is best addressed at an actual concrete way to solve the problem by barking at us as if we can do something. We can't write traffic tickets. We can't do a lot of things. But to bark at us and say that the dumping should be our issue and we're not doing anything about it is misleading to the public.
Yeah,
So-
it's certainly I mean, along those same lines, I
You
guess
can
I
make a
would say.
resolution.
There are efforts
You
that we
make a
can make,
resolution.
but to say that we have, that it's an authority that we possess,
Right.
or, you know, I think that's a valid point. There are certainly efforts we can do, to keep the issue, in the forefront, but we're playing more of an advocate's role, as opposed to, an authoritative role, I think, so.
Yep.
Okay,
Make
so
a
I have some
resolution,
comments,
show you
so I have
care.
some comments on this. So from 2004 to 2008, when Mr. Forlini was sitting here, like I mentioned to you, over the last several years, I can't tell you how many resolutions we signed. I'm sure that Adam remembers that. Resolution after resolution after resolution. Mr. Forlini was a huge water advocate. I know that we sent many resolutions to different people, you know, and I've said for 12 years now, you know, I don't buy this cop-out stuff, all right? But the simple fact is, if you want to fix it, you go to Huron-Clinton Metro Park, you get us, and you get whatever Mount Clemens, whoever's really taking the brunt of it, and you go sue them. And then all of a sudden now, you're going to get some action. The only way you're going to get action is to sue them. And I said that for 12 years.
Are you
Now-
making a motion, Derek?
Now, whether that, I've been more than happy to do that for years.
I've never seen an agenda item from you with that on
Absolutely,
it.
you know.
You bring
I'm
it next
ready to
meeting.
do that.
You want me to put it on, put a
You know,
placeholder
they did
for
it
you?
up in, whatever that city is, I think Lexington right now.
No, the DEQ sued Worth Township for having failing septic systems.
Okay, so why don't we talk to them and have them sue 12 towns?
Well, DEQ is the one that permits 12 towns.
Well, then
Yes.
we sue them we go with the Huron-Clinton Metro Park, see if they want to co-opt and go sue them.
I'd be happy to add it to the agenda.
Well, let's talk to them.
Do it.
I'm more than
No.
happy to
Who's in
make
the
a
ground?
motion and
No.
vote for that. We gotta find out how much that costs and go from there. I think the citizens, even if it was a couple, $300,000, I think the citizens in Harrison Township would be more than happy to pay that with all the canals. This is a boating
Yeah.
community
You like the fish
shutting
in our
down,
backyard.
you know, and if you're on Clinton Metro Park, they're closing down. It's pretty simple, you know, and I've said this. You know, when they, you know, Mr. Bardell, they dump it in the water, it comes down, you know, all that sewage goes right into the Metro Park. 3 days later, it's closed for E. coli. This doesn't take $1 million, you know, study to do. It's very common sense. You want to shut it down, you got to force those communities, which they've had probably 30 years. This is a problem that's been going on for 30-some years, longer than that. They need to separate their storm sewers. They need to suck it up and do it and stop dumping waste in our rivers. It's that
It's in our
simple.
backyard. Thank you.
So, you know, I don't know what that cost would be. I don't know who would co-opt with that. You know, but I'm certainly all for it.
You know, I don't think anyone's against water
I
quality.
agree,
You're not gonna,
I agree.
But here's the thing, and I think the night that Mr. Gutau was here, a few of us talked to him afterwards, and we said, we'd be happy to do a resolution. But we think the resolution should have something in the end that's a call to action beyond water quality. Because of course everyone's going to say, I like water quality. We need to come up with, through our legislatures, not the courts, and hope that one person in a black robe likes us. We need to have our state legislature, who are the people with the proper authority, make these kinds of decisions. And until people yell at their legislatures, the state legislature, enough to enforce things differently and change the way DEQ implements the laws from the federal government, you know, we're not gonna change anything here in Harrison Township. We could throw money away at a lawsuit, but I can tell you that it gets thrown out because they say you have no standing.
Right.
You know, and I wish that was easy.
Well,
I
like
wish it was
said-
that easy.
Well, I'm sorry, like I said in a previous meeting, I don't know, over the years, well, we'll just put a dam right here when it comes into Harrison Township, and we'll just let the clean water come through. Then we'll see some action.
And again, I think this board has taken a tact of finding practical solutions that actually affect water quality in the short term that we can affect. Whether it's the Phragmites grant that we did today, whether it's the Water Towns grant, whether it's the investments that we've made in improving our sewer system. You know, those are things that we can affect today and that we have made those decisions. You know, we've made real decisions, not tilting at windmills where we're not gonna get anything. So.
Well, I guess I look at me, you know, I've separated water and sewer. I paid for that, right? At my house, I have that paid. You know, these other towns need to start moving that way and you know, just,
What did you do? You separated at your home?
no, in my house, we have separate stormwater, sewer, and sewer. That's
Sure.
the problem, right? In these
All
other
new
towns-
construction.
Right, so in these towns, they overflow and they have to get rid of it, so they dump it in the closest water thing, somehow that's legal and partially treated. I get that it's quote partially treated, but, you know, people that live there, they'll tell you a different story about stuff floating down the river. I wouldn't go in the river, you know, but it would be nice, you know, it just seems like, you know, you get frustrated because, you know, everybody, I think, agrees on the same issue. It's just, how do you attack it and how do you get it done? Something so easy, somebody dumping raw sewage in the, whether it's partially treated or not, whatever, dumping raw sewage in the river, how do we get it to stop? And what's the easiest way to get it to end? You know, do we have to get people, you know, hey, I'll go stand with the sign out there with you, Bill. I have no problem doing that. Go pick it. You can go pick it if you want. You know, it's how Mart's brought, you know, his issue, put that toilet up and, you know, all of a sudden everybody was paying attention to Mr. Martz. Who's a great guy, by the way, you know. But that's really all I have to say. It's very frustrating when you try and get something done, it's just like spinning your wheels, you know.
Any other board comment?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Is there support?
Support.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Board meeting adjourned.
Well, you gotta go yell at them. Bill. Bill.